Hello, everyone. This is our week 12 module where we'll be talking about government-related mass murders and hate-motivated mass murders. Before we get into that, though, let's take a look back at module 11. Before I dig too deep into this, I do want to bring up something that was pointed out to me. I do realize that in presenting some of these videos, I've been kind of talking fast, and there is a reason behind that. I'm trying to keep these between 20 to 30 minutes, trying not to ever go over 30 minutes, trying to keep it around the 25-minute mark or less, simply because I don't want to overwhelm you with information. I know there's a lot of information in this class. Not only do you have the textbook materials, but you also have some supplemental reading material that kind of help facilitates what you got to do, in addition to all the assignments that you have for this class. So I am trying to keep these videos kind of shorter so you can get the material while at the same time being able the opportunity to go over the things that you need to go over. I will try to talk a little bit slower, but as I see the timer getting close to the 25 to 30-minute mark, I tend to speed up my talking. I will try to keep it, again, try to keep it slower so you get all the information. So if I am talking too fast and it's hard to understand and if you rewind it and you still can't understand, just let me know and I will try to slow down even more. So again, this is our module 12 preview. And just a brief look back at module 11, we talked about the motivations of employment-related mass murders and the school shootings. You had 2 chapters to read, as well as some supplemental material to read and to watch. And your 2 assignments for last week were the discussion questions and the short writing assignment, both of which are past due now. So if you have not turned those in yet, please make sure you do so that you can get some credit. All right, that's the module 11 wrap up. Module 12, we're going to talk about what motivates mass murders to take out the frustrations on government workers. And we're going to look at the motivations behind some of the mass murders as well. Sorry, behind some of the hate mass murders. Your reading material this week is Chapter 18, Fighting City Hall, and Chapter 19, Hate Motivated Mass Murders. You also have 3 supplemental reading materials, 2 videos to watch, which we'll get into more in just a little bit. And your only assignment this week are the discussion questions, which I'll get into in just a minute. So chapter 18 is entitled Fighting City Hall. And the chapter starts off talking about an individual by the name of Charles Thornton. Charles Thornton was an individual who had his own business in a low-income area of St. Louis. He wasn't able to afford a warehouse to store his heavy equipment, so instead of doing that, he parked the things either at his house or wherever he could find space at the job. The city changed some of the zoning regulations that prevented him from parking his equipment on the city streets. And he kept getting tickets and citations and stuff like that. Before he knew it, the violations exceeded $20,000. And at one point, he was offered that all the fines would be excused if he stopped doing it, but instead of taking that, he continued to be stubborn and disgruntled and felt like because he was a black business owner, he wasn't being awarded some of the rich construction contracts, and he ended up taking out some of his frustrations on City Hall. In February of 2008, he fatally shot a police officer who was standing nearby. Then he entered the building with a gun of that slain police officer and then started shooting council members. He disrupted the meeting, obviously, through gunfire, shot and killed a second police officer, a public works director, and 2 city council members. He also wounded the reporter, the mayor, and the mayor ended up later on dying before he ended up being gunned down by the police. So that's an example of one individual who took out their frustrations on City Hall. The chapter talks about some other things as well. When it comes to attacking the government system, multiple murders aimed at the government often appear to be indiscriminate or random, but these acts are a little more selective than they look. Some of the people choose out their victims not because they as individuals are directly responsible for their situation, but they represent the organization that they think is unfair. In today's world, more and more people are being forced to deal with mega systems, whether it's large bureaucratic organizations, government institutions, etc. They end up taking their frustrations a lot of times on the people that they meet first, whether it be a clerk working the reception desk or somebody they meet in the public. There's a couple of examples that I can think of off the top of my head where a disgruntled person took out their frustrations on legal work. I think of one institution where an individual went to the Board of County Supervisors, didn't get what they want, and ended up shooting one of the individuals on the Board of Supervisors. Luckily, nobody was killed in that situation, but one individual was shot. I could think of another situation where somebody was taking their frustrations out on not being able to get government benefits, and when a food person, a person who was delivering food boxes, showed up, they ended up taking their frustrations out on them. Many people in these types of situations are on the losing ends of legal battles. And they do not necessarily go after the adversaries that beat them, but instead they might go after the legal system. An example of that is an individual named George Lott who opened fire his 9mm handgun at a court proceeding that really had nothing to do with his situation. He just wanted to take out his situation on other people. A lot of these individuals will may file some sort of grievance against the public sector, have their grievances dismissed or not heard of, and feel like the people like government money-grubbing institutions or corporations all deserve to die for their misdeeds, if you will. Sometimes they may take out their frustrations on places like the Better Business Bureau, but more and more it seems to be at the agency or at something that's related to what they're doing. More times than not, the weapon of choice is some sort of handgun or some sort of firearm, whether it be a handgun, semi-automatic handgun, or something similar to that. Looking through this chapter, see if there's anything else you want to do. There's examples of, it seems like more and more that a lot of people are becoming more and more frustrated with different parts of government, whether it be customer relations, and they're becoming frustrated with things like automated phone systems, confusing buttons to push. I know personally that's a frustration of mine. It's like you call this number and then they ask you like punch in your date of birth or social security number or something along those lines. And then you finally get to talk to somebody after pushing a bunch of buttons and they ask you the same question that you had to enter in the automated phone systems. Sometimes you're on hold for hours. I can see how that could be frustrating, not to the point where I'd want to take out my frustrations and kill somebody, but some people have a very low tolerance for those types of things. Other things that can cause people to go get upset is, like I mentioned before, is they feel like they're being wronged by the government, et cetera, et cetera. Some big entities, pharmaceutical industries have been a target, courts have been a target, just big business in general has been a target. So moving on to chapter 9, when we talk about hate-motivated mass murder, the chapter starts off talking about serial killings, or mass murder, I should say, in Canada, which we don't hear too much about Canada's mass murders or violence in Canada. And it talks about an individual by the name of, what's his name? His last name is Lapine, Mark Lapine. He walked into the engineering building at Montreal School of Engineering, and he was carrying with him a 223 caliber Ruger Mini 45, a semi-automatic rifle, and that was anything in terms of mini. So prior to his mass murder, he had visited the engineering building on several occasions, designed a route, planned out his what he was going to do. And his idea was he wanted to target women, especially feminists, whom he held responsible for a lot of his troubles. So he ended up going to this College of Engineering and ended up killing, let me look at, he had a listing of 19 names, Canadian women, including a sportscaster, a police woman, and other public figures that he targeted. I'm trying to see if it gives me a number of victims that he killed. I don't see it at first glance here. Oh, 14 women he killed between the ages of 21 and 31. So his was a hate towards women. Um, Typically, a lot of these individuals have contempt for something. In Lapine's case, it was generally hatred towards his mother because she had abandoned him earlier, or perhaps he was a victim of child abuse at her hands. Um, so a lot of these individuals will target people that they don't love or don't like. Again, Lapine was women. There's other examples of people who take out their hate on a particular population. Another one, a female, Suzanne Hupp, ended up killing her parents. I'm sorry, she had actually one who was involved in a shooting. She was a victim where she took her parents out to lunch, and the shooter came into where they were having lunch and killed both of her parents, and she was able to escape. A lot of these individuals are rejected and feel involuntary celibacy. In other words, we talked about the individual who was from an affluent neighborhood or affluent community and ended up taking his frustrations out on the women he felt like um, didn't show him the affection that he thought he deserved. So a lot of these individuals feel as though they've been rejected by females, and again, will take out their frustrations on the population that they hate most, that being the females. A lot of these mass murderers believe that are a victim, and so their resentment is not aimed necessarily at a few individuals, but an entire group of people who are seen as responsible for their problems. The murderer is convinced that society has changed for the worse. Some people believe that politicians are leading the way, and that people like himself are the little guy, and they've lost all control of their own destiny. So they view like they're losing out, they're being victimized, they resent it, and they're looking for someone to blame. A growing number of observers have applied the term downward mobility to characterize the economic plight of this population. Um, and they're not able to climb the socioeconomic ladder that their predecessors or their ancestors before them were able to do. Instead of trying to figure out a way to fix their situation, they feel personally threatened by women, immigrants, people of color, people of wealth, status, and power, and they take out their frustrations on those as well. During 1990s, most hate crimes would be characterized as thrill motivated, that the groups of teenagers or young adults were looking some sort of excitement, would go out on Saturday night looking for a victim to assault or some of their property to vandalize. More recently, though, these hate crimes have become much more violent, much more defensive from the hate monger's point of view, and they're targeting a particular group of outsiders in response to some sort of perceived threat, and often following a highly publicized incident. In defense of hate crimes, perpetrator tends to be somewhat older, rather than operate in a group. He attacks more often alone. He feels as though he's a victim, someone who would be economic well off if it wasn't for the particular population that they're targeting. A good example of we've seen a lot more hate motivated crimes, attacks, especially in the Muslim and Arab populations after the September 11th terrorist attack that killed 3,000 people. Most people tend to believe that these individuals are out to get them, so they want to get them first. We also see some increase in hate crimes against homosexuals after the gay marriage law was passed. Some attacks against Black Americans after President Obama was elected, or against Latinos when unemployment peaked in the 2010s. So there's some examples of when we could see these hate crimes exist. One of the theories that you could talk about this is something called replacement theory, and a large and growing number of immigrants coming to the United States from Latin American countries or Asia over the past 20 years has been met with resistance and sometimes even violent resistance. where certain Native white Americans embraced the Great Replacement theory, which they believe that their place in society is being replaced by immigrants, people of color, or Jewish people. And sometimes their hate crimes are taken out on these types of individuals. For example, in 1980, whites comprised almost 80% of the American population, yet by 2020, the percentage has shrunk to around 60%. So a lot of these people believe that they're being replaced by a lot of these immigrants, and they take out their frustrations on the population that they think are replacing them. So that wraps up chapter 19, hate-motivated mass murders. Your assignment for this week, you also have, before I get to that though, you have some additional reading material. You have 3 more articles. One is called The Night Tragedy That Came to Kirkwood, the Tarrant Courthouse shootings, and the high-rise shooting that changed San Francisco forever. All 3 of these articles are hate-related mass murders, so make sure you read those as well. There's also another one called another video to watch called The Mass Massacre at the Luby's Cafeteria in Kylene, which I believe I mentioned in previous weeks. And there's also the one I told you about, Elliot Rodger, who killed 7 people in Santa Barbara and ended up recording his video. He's the one that got retribution on people he thought were out to get him and that rejected his advancements. You also have 2 podcasts to listen to. One is on Mark Martin. He's the family annihilator and went on a killing spree. And then the one I just told you about in Montreal on Mark Lapine, the mass murderer. And then there's also a thing you can explore on how to identify high-risk and violent employees. Again, your only assignment for this week are your discussion questions. The discussion questions this week are just 1 questions, in which you're going to watch Elliot Rodger's video statement. You might have watched it in a previous class, but I do have a link to it in the assignment description, where you're going to compare him and Kyle Huff's letter to his brother, which is on page 289 of the textbook, and what are the similarities and differences between Rodgers and Huff's attitudes towards sex. What would have contributed to these attitudes, such as their backgrounds, and did their attitudes lead to the murders that they committed? Why or why not? So if I look at page 289, just to make sure, it is it's a letter dated 3/23/2006, and it says from Kane to Kyle. And it's really short. It's a 1 paragraph. So what you're going to do is you're going to compare this letter to the Elliot Rodgers video, and you're going to discuss any similarities or differences between the 2. So just as a reminder, I know it's getting late in the semester. This is going to wrap up our 3rd quarter. So we're coming down the home stretch. So please don't relax on your discussion questions. Please make sure you're responding in a meaningful manner to not only the question, but to your classmates or myself. Again, these are how your attendances are recorded, and you need to respond to the questions by Thursday of this week and your classmates by Saturday of this week. So that wraps up Module 12. Again, you have chapters 18 and chapters 19 to read. You have 3 articles to supplement that reading. You have 2 videos to watch, 2 podcasts to listen to, and the discussion questions to complete. Next week in Module 13, as we go down the home stretch of the 4th quarter of our class, we're going to talk about terrorisms and mass murders and how they are linked. And we're also going to look at how mental illness plays a role in mass murders. There's quite a bit of material for next week, but we'll get to that more in detail next week. That wraps up our material for Module 12's preview. I hope that you enjoyed this week's material, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Until next week, have a good week, and I will see you in class.